Good morning and welcome to the Determining Decade Town Hall discussion with California Natural Resources Secretary Wade Crowfoot. Wade, it's great to see your face out there. Little COVID elbow bump to get things going. I just want to thank everyone out there in the greater Nature Conservancy California family for taking this time to join us. We are living in unprecedented times. We wake up every day with heavy thoughts about what does this all mean for us, for our family, for our friends, and our heart and our hopes go out to all of you that you are well, that your families are well, that your communities are enduring through this all. And these are challenging times, and we acknowledge that. We thank you for taking this time to spend with us today and talking to one of my most inspirational friends about conservation in Wade Crowfoot. So I'm very excited to have this conversation with you all today. My name is Jay Ziegler. I am the Director of Policy and External Affairs for the Nature Conservancy here in California. It's the best job I've ever had. It's really an amazing place to be. And I thank you all for joining us. And Wade, you are talking today with the Nature Conservancy's California Board, our Leadership Council, our conservation professionals that lead our strategies, many of whom you've sat down with, and we've had great conversations about thinking about California's leadership, the Nature Conservancy's role, and how we work together to achieve conservation and climate goals in California. Since 1951, the Nature Conservancy has been responsible for the conservation of some 120 million acres of lands around the world and 173 million acres of ocean habitat. In this state, in California, the way that's translated in our work here, which now encompasses more than 60 years of work in our state, we have protected some 1.5 million acres of land in the state. And we've been involved in protecting almost 4 million acres of critical ocean habitat that we'll talk about a bit in our conversation today with Secretary Crowfoot. And this is not just another webinar. It's not just another conversation out there. This Determining Decade is for real. It is the driver of our strategy in California. The changes brought up by climate change, the resilience factors, the adaptation that we need to undertake to address climate change effect, the conservation challenges for habitat and wildlife are upon us. And we have to reverse this trajectory in the next 10 years. So that really is the driving goal of this. And I thank all of you, the supporters, the conservation professionals, the teams that are working on these issues out there for joining us. And we really appreciate your engagement here in the next hour. To submit a question in our dialogue today, there's a Q&A feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You should be able to see that now. Please click on that, and my colleague Liz Forsberg, who will be joining us shortly, is going to be getting those questions into the queue so we can get as much of your involvement and as many questions answered as we can today. And so with that, it is really my pleasure to bring this conversation with Secretary Crowfoot to you. And Wade, in these times of we've known each other a long time, and we've never been through anything like this. How's your family doing? How's your community doing out there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we're persevering, like probably everybody else here today. We've talked a lot about climate resilience in the state, but I don't think we expected our resilience to be tested in quite this way. When we think about this challenge, it's really about physical health resilience, but also emotional and mental health. I'm in a household. My wife and I are raising our 5-year-old with 2 full-time jobs. So I'll be honest, it's a really challenging time. I've never worked harder in my job, and also with the huge challenge of juggling a 5-year-old who can't understand why she's not in kindergarten. So it's frankly it's challenging all the way around, and to be honest, and I think it's also a little hard because of the uncertainty. Really understanding it would be one thing if we knew this was going to be done in 2 more weeks, but we don't. So we're navigating it. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in the state, and I think like everybody probably that's joining us today, the way we're keeping forward is just not letting that physical distance create social distance, and doing those Zoom happy hours and Zoom family dinners. It's not the same as the real thing, but it's sustaining us.
Yeah, good for you. Well, we appreciate your leadership. I think the constant updates from Governor Newsom daily are helpful in just kind of understanding where we are and getting our head around that. You are also running an agency with 6 departments and almost 20,000 employees. You talk a little about some of the real challenges that you've confronted, just kind of keeping things going.
Yeah, I mean, I would put it in different buckets. One bucket is obviously public spaces and open spaces. So in our agency, we have our state parks, so parks and recreation, so that's state parks, state beaches, but also a bunch of departments and conservancies actually have significant open spaces. In Southern California, places like Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy or Baldwin Hills Conservancy. Our Department of Fish and Wildlife, as you all know, has ecological reserves. Our Cal Fire Department has experimental forests. And so one big question is, how do we enable people to use those incredible outdoor spaces, which is never more important for our physical and emotional mental health, at the same time be safe about it? I think initially when the stay-at-home order, well, I know initially when the stay-at-home order was issued, we encouraged people to get to parks, get to beaches, get outdoors, do it safely, stay with your cohort, physical distance. And what we realized is that a lot of our open spaces and parks were being overwhelmed, and physical distancing was not possible, including beaches, for example, in LA County. So then we very quickly had to adjust and think about, okay, how do we maintain public access, but while not putting people at risk, or allowing people to access in ways that are going to keep them safe. And that's dynamic. You may have followed the news about the Orange County beaches, for example. I was right in the middle of that. This weekend, LA County is reopening its trails for hiking. And so in real time, we're working with our state parks and our conservancies down there to figure out how that impacts open space. So that's one big bucket. Another big bucket is, we also regulate. Our Coastal Commission, for example, our California Geologic Energy Management Agency regulates oil and gas. So, there are deadlines for permitting. There are certain requirements on the regulated community. So one big question is, what do we modify given the crisis? Likewise, how do we ensure public access, transparency to our decision-making, enable public comment periods for CEQA? So all of that has sort of, been raised, all those questions have been raised. And then lastly, just like you all at TNC, we're an employer. So we had to move aggressively to get as many people out of, our physical workspaces as possible. Some people in our agency are obviously out in the field, think firefighters or peace officers for parks or fish and wildlife. They got to continue to do their work. But we had this massive shift to telecommuting. And state government is not terribly nimble. You wouldn't think of the government as nimble. So we've moved, a good majority of our agency employees to teleworking, and that's also been a challenge.
Yeah. Whatever we can do in getting information out about use of the public spaces as this is evolving, we're excited to do that with you. So know that we want to be a partner with you there.
Totally.
Yeah. Hey, let's step back a bit. We were, very excited. We talked prior to your appointment. It was, we worked very closely together, the Nature Conservancy and the Water Foundation, as when you were the leader there and passing Measure N to really create a new stormwater management strategy in Los Angeles. And prior to that, we worked closely with you and when you were in the Cabinet Secretary's office in Governor Brown's administration. And you and I go back to the days of partnering when you were at Environmental Defense. But you talk a little bit in these times about what's really driving you in your work and how you keep focus on that big picture?
Yeah, I mean, somebody put it really well to me, which is, the priorities don't change, the strategies change. And one thing I worked hard to do in the first year for our agency is set really clear priorities. And really they're fourfold. One is build our climate resilience. The way I talk about that with people who aren't in this field is, how do we best protect people and nature from the impacts of climate change? Californians get it. It's a huge priority given wildfire, flooding, drought, sea level rise, extreme heat. So that's number one. Number two is, how do we protect and maintain our biodiversity? I talk about that in the context of, people know that climate change is a planetary threat. The second major planetary threat is the loss of biodiversity and the mass extinction crisis happening across the world. We in California are incredibly fortunate to be one of the most biodiverse places in the world for a lot of reasons. It's not something we think a lot about. We have really strong laws to protect species on the brink of extinction, but we don't do enough upstream of that to keep that biodiversity helpful or healthy. So biodiversity is second. Third is, how do we expand access for all Californians to these incredible state beaches and parks and open spaces that we have? Governor Newsom, talks really passionately about a Californian for all, equity of opportunity. So we're focused on translating that within natural resources to figure out how do we expand access. That's the third priority. The fourth priority is cutting green tape. How do we allow good things to happen more quickly and cost effectively? You all at TNC are masters in actually partnering with government to actually do good things. Think wetland restoration or stream bed restoration. Problem is in government, we make it too hard to get that work done. So that's my fourth priority. So Jay, I have to say that, I'd say the first month of the stay-at-home order definitely kind of knocked us back on our heels, and we were taking care of just trying to stabilize, the workforce and deal with some of these issues. Now we're sort of settling in, recognizing that we're going to be telecommuting for a long while. And we're really, over the last 3 weeks, we've really kind of refocused on, okay, look, how do we manage this COVID crisis, but also move forward our priorities with different strategies?
Yeah, well, and especially I think a lot of Californians woke up today to this new reality, right? This is, we went from this extraordinary picture of a 21 billion surplus forecast for this year to now a forecast of $50+ billion in deficit. And can you give us a little window on how the agency is really adjusting to this? I know we'll hear more from Governor Newsom next week in the May revise, but obviously this is virtually an unprecedented fiscal challenge, even alongside the 2001, 2008 recovery.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a change that none of us could have imagined in our wildest nightmare. Just 3 months ago, we were talking about how to use the surplus to make some really historic investments towards those priorities I just mentioned. And now we're in a situation where, across our agencies, ours included, we're going to have to make difficult cuts. Paul Krugman put it best in the New York Times. He said, we've had to put our economy into a medically induced coma.
Yeah.
And that has impacted, obviously, the tax, revenue when people are at home and not spending money, but also on things like our state park entrance fees or our concessions revenue, or our hunting and fishing licenses are down, for example. So we've very quickly had to think about, how do we help government balance its budget without taking a large step backwards on these priorities. Many on the phone, but maybe not everybody knows that by law, our state government has to balance our budget each year. So whereas the federal government can deficit spend and essentially retain a deficit, state government cannot. So we have to actually, by end of June, balance the budget. There's going to be a lot of talk this week, Jay, next week about, sort of the legislature's estimate of what we need to, solve for, and our estimate. But the short of it is there's going to be difficult cuts, and our resources agency will not be spared from those.
Yeah. Well, whatever we can do to help here. We recognize the magnitude of this moment. I think one of the solutions that we've been working with you closely on over the past year in the big picture on how we free up other revenue streams has been the idea of a climate resilience bond to invest in preparedness for climate change across the state, floodplains, stormwater systems, and the like. And especially dealing with fire resilience, safe, clean drinking water that remain the top concern of Californians. Do you think we have an opportunity to move a climate resilience bond if we could get aligned, work together on this, or what's your thinking on that now?
Well, I'd say a few things. I mean, first of all, thanks to TNC, you all are sort of the key external architects of these bonds that have really allowed for these investments in natural resources. So huge thanks for being a partner. And on this one, you guys have really nudged it along. In January, the governor made a big announcement when he said he's prioritizing getting this climate resilience bond on the ballot. And that followed bills being introduced the prior year in the legislature. So we were sort of on the trajectory for a climate resilience bond. And it wasn't a question of if, it was a question of what's in the bond and how much the bond is. Obviously, the world has changed, and there are big questions being raised about, what amount of economic stimulus makes sense. Is it a general obligation bond? Is it something else? Also, the need, any investment by the state really has to at least be partially shaped by creating jobs and generating economic activity, given the remarkable unemployment numbers we're seeing right now. Now, here's what I think, which is it's not an either or, it's an and, which means to say Californians across the state in poll after poll understand that we need to do a lot more to protect ourselves against these climate-driven threats. Wildfire being the most visible, but 5 years ago it was drought. And I think California voters are smart, and I think I think that they can support investments that get people back to work and generate economic activity across the state, but are multi-benefit and build that resilience. So a good example for is regional water infrastructure that helps implement the state's groundwater management. Critical investment toward becoming more resilient against drought, but then also really beneficial in terms of getting people to work in the community on infrastructure projects. So I think that there'll be an active conversation over the next month in whether such a bond is feasible, one that potentially, is shaped around jobs, but includes major investments in resilience. At least that's what I hope the dialogue is.
That's great. I mean, we're very excited to join you in that conversation, and we're doing our part now in the legislature to kind of keep pushing on creativity to give Californians something to be hopeful for about those outdoor spaces that they care so much about, as you point out. That it's, and I do think I share your point of view that this idea that Californians connect with the reality of climate change in a different way than other people do across the country is just for real. That is happening, and we're seeing that again and again, and do appreciate your leadership on that. Hey, I am going to turn to my colleague, Liz Forsberg, who's been getting in questions from folks that are tuning in today to really join the conversation. And again, folks, there is a little tab in the lower right-hand part of your screen. Please click on that and send the questions on in to Liz. And Liz, I hope I've got you out there.
Great, thanks, Jay. So first question, Secretary Crowfoot. Amid the new COVID-19 realities, what can we expect as the administration continues to meet California's climate goals?
Really good question. I think at the highest level, we've had conversations directly with the governor, and he's very clear. This COVID crisis is something we have to focus on, but it's not going to knock us off our long-term priorities that reflect our values. So what that means is we will continue to be aggressive in advancing our climate goals, but then also obviously creating equity on healthcare access, supporting our immigrant populations, et cetera. So our recovery is going to be a climate resilient recovery and one that really lifts up all Californians. What does that mean sort of in terms of concreteness? One is we need to continue to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, obviously. We have a really aggressive 2030 goal that we need to meet. So this means continuing to double down on smart standards and regulatory decisions to reduce that pollution. It also means, as we can, to invest where we need to in this transformation that needs to get made. I would say particularly in the area of electrification of vehicles. What's remarkable is almost 2/3 of the electrons that we'll use today in this state come from carbon-free sources of energy, which is amazing. So we've done really good. We're really strong on the energy generation side. We have to do more, but we really need to focus on electrifying transportation. So that's on sort of the so-called mitigation side. On the adaptation or resilience side, I think California can be much more of a leader on a number of fronts. And that includes actually giving life to a proactive natural and working land strategy. While we're reducing pollution, we need to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And you all lead on this, so you know this, which is California has not had the aspiration and the focus that's needed to really figure out how do we use our natural areas, from our coastal wetlands to our Sierra Mountain meadows, to actually sequester carbon. How do we optimize land management of those natural areas to actually bring pollution or carbon out of the air and keep it out of the atmosphere? But then also, how do we use our farms, our ranchers? How do we encourage practices that actually sequester carbon? So that's one area that we're going to actually, continue to focus on in the Natural Resources Agency. And I think success next year in that area means that there is a very coherent, transparent strategy with priorities. Lastly, our interagency leadership team on climate, which we know as a sort of our climate cabinet, has been focusing on supporting a really robust scoping plan at our Air Resources Board. The scoping plan is essentially the roadmap to meet our climate goals, and a new scoping plan is required in 2022. That's actually not that far away, considering the process takes over a year. So our focus is really helping ARB and pitching in on developing a really strong 7-year roadmap for the next tranche of progress we need to make on climate. But then, as we're doing that sort of longer term planning, continue to make progress on reducing emissions and start to really mobilize strategies to remove carbon from the atmosphere.
Yeah, we really look forward to working with you in this scoping plan and enhancing the role for natural and working lands. And I just wonder, as you think about it, and you've talked to a lot of folks, are there lessons? We're all commuting less. So are there new lessons that we can drive in thinking about how we just work smarter and work with a lesser carbon and pollution footprint out there? Are there lessons that you're picking up along the way here?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I would say telecommuting or remote commuting or remote working was very much an exception to the norm in state government. You had to sign a super complicated, telecommuting contract, et cetera. Obviously, that's all changed. And what we're finding is a lot of folks are maintaining a high level of productivity while telecommuting. We obviously know it's had incredible positive impacts on our air quality. So actually at our highest levels, I think you'll see coming out of this COVID crisis, a level of remote working that is like quantum levels larger than it had been in the past. And that's a big deal. Government is a model. We're also a 220,000 person company. So in places like where I live in Sacramento, just imagine if a majority of state workers got to telecommute once or twice a week, it would be a big deal. Likewise, we had all of these hidebound processes. For example, the need for wet signatures on grants. And we had a agency-wide license for DocuSign, which is of course the technology that allows you to electronic signature. But most of our departments didn't use it to sign, or they wouldn't accept it from grantees. And our control agencies, Department of Finance, State Controller's Office, definitely didn't accept it. That's also changed. Now our control agencies are accepting it. We're using it for contracts with each other. And I believe we're accepting it from organizations like yours. That's a small change, but if you find about 10 of those things, along with telecommuting, we're going to be a more efficient government with a lesser footprint. Last point, we are moving into a new building next year, Natural Resources Agency headquarters, and our goal was to, in essence, have the amount of hard copy paper that we're going to use. We're revising that goal to be more ambitious, and we're working to actually achieve that goal more quickly. Those are just some examples of how our work world is going to change.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I think, we are making some real progress in the Bay Area and Southern California on advancing these green prints for smart integrated growth management that really looks at natural systems, connectivity, and efficiency of workforce movement for the future. And so we're excited to join you in that area as well. Hey, Liz, I'm sure you're getting a lot more across your desk here. Can you bring us some more questions? And
yeah, sure. As a reminder, everyone, make sure you add your questions into the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. But our next question, Secretary Crowfoot, as you know, the state faces major impacts from wildfires. What is the state doing to prepare for the upcoming wildfire season?
Yeah, great question. So I put it in the sort of the response, building and improving our ability to respond to wildfires, but equally importantly, actually how to reduce risks from catastrophic wildfire. So we all know CAL FIRE and just, how well loved and respected our firefighters are. And so part of this is ensuring that we can actually get to fires quickly to protect communities. And there's been major investments in that. But I think the part that maybe we have more in common with the TNC is how do we address this worsening trend of these catastrophic wildfires? We know that wildfire is a part of our ecology, much like drought is. So the goal is not to have any fire, but of course, what we want to do is control our fires, prescribed fires, but then also manage our forests so that when there are wildfires, they don't turn into huge catastrophic fires that become very large and, in essence, totally denude the landscape. And so we've had an active partnership with TNC around forest management, which is how do we do big landscape level forest health projects that we keep sort of appropriate density in our forests that really sort of mimics the natural condition of the forest in ways that benefit the ecology, the ecosystems that rely on those forests, but then also protects the communities. So a large portion, for example, of the funding that we generate through our cap and trade program continues to go to vegetation management. And increasingly, we're trying to figure out how to partner with groups on the ground, whether that's the Nature Conservancy or some of our state conservancies like the Tahoe Conservancy or the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, to do these big landscape level vegetation management projects that are not only focused on controlling for catastrophic wildfire, but also focused on ecosystem benefits, including the water quality and water quantity that you protect when you manage a forest effectively, and for ecosystem benefits. So I think what you'll see in this coming budget that we'll be talking about in the next couple of weeks is continued investments in forest health projects as well as wildfire response.
Yeah, these are really incredible partnerships. I mean, they're, as you point out, it's the Tahoe Conservancy, it's the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, it's also the Placer County Water Agency, Yuba County Water Agency. It's really thinking about how we manage these headwaters in a brand new, bigger paradigm. And I think the progress that we have made in the last couple of years is really one of the things that I find most exhilarating. That it really, we've taken it with you to Washington as well and gotten additional resources in an administration that hasn't been very friendly on environmental funding and regulation in Washington. So we appreciate your perseverance in this, because that I think that's probably the first budget line that we at the Nature Conservancy are going to be looking at. Can we keep these forest health partnerships and community resilience partnerships going?
Yeah, and I would just make a mention of the growing partnership we have with California tribes. California tribal communities have actually been using prescribed fire for thousands of years. And remarkably, 150 years ago when European settlers came, and for several decades until fairly recently, they actually legally outlawed prescribed fire and didn't let those tribal communities manage the forest with prescribed fire. And so some of the most expert entities in the state on how we manage our forests with fire are the tribes. And so it's some really powerful partnerships where we're learning that traditional ecological knowledge from the tribes. And I'll just give a shout out to your education program. I mentioned I had a 5-year-old, and one of our class assignments was going on a video field trip. And the teacher gave us a link to, I think it was the Nature Conservancy, and going on these field trips around the world. And we spent 40 minutes learning about the Emerald Edge yesterday up in British Columbia. And I loved the featuring the tribal communities up there. So just a shout out to really the growing partnerships between tribes, not only in government, but also NGOs.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that we've all got a lot we can learn from each other in this, and certainly in California, in the Klamath watershed with the Yurok, Hupa tribes, we've really been doing a lot of work up there, and our chief ecologist Ed Smith in this space has really been pioneering some of that and deepening our relationships there. So appreciate your raising that. Hey, Liz, I'm probably getting you further behind here.
Sure, so let's switch over to oceans. So protecting our oceans is important for all Californians. What are some actions the administration is taking to protect our oceans?
Yeah, obviously we have major challenges with our oceans. Our oceans have absorbed a large portion of our carbon pollution that we've generated in recent decades. And that, of course, has acidified the water. And as I understand it, warmed the waters. And we're seeing chickens coming home to roost on that. Our kelp forests, which are essentially the great redwoods of our coast, that have provided this incomparable ecosystem for the northern half of our coast state, our coast in our state, is almost gone. And as a result of a complex set of dynamics that we believe is caused or driven anyways by climate change. So we have major challenges. At the same time, we're building on a really strong foundation of policy in California, particularly with our marine protected areas, which are really a world model of ecologically linked network of protected areas. I think 118 protected areas. We need to double down on this though. And we recruited a great environmental leader, a gentleman named Mark Gold, who had led Heal the Bay in Los Angeles for so many years and was at UCLA. And he's our Deputy Secretary for Oceans and Coasts, and he also leads our Ocean Protection Council. And under his leadership, just a couple months ago, we institutionalized a new strategic plan for the next 5 years. And plans have differing levels of quality, but I think this is one of the best strategic plans I've been part of in government, in part because it really holds itself to very clear metrics in terms of what we need to do. So I imagine your ocean staff knows this, but if anybody else wants to understand sort of both the challenges, but also the work plan for the state, they should look at that. And we're doing some very incredible, cool, innovative partnerships. So for example, we're using a grant to hire unemployed abalone divers in the North Coast. Unemployed because they can't commercially fish for or dive for abalone anymore as a result of just how that population's plummeted. But they're actually getting employed to go out there and harvest these so-called purple urchin.
Yep.
And it's the purple urchin that have denuded those kelp forests. And we are partnering with an NGO called Reef Check to really do that purple urchin harvest in certain areas and understanding the ecological benefit of actually removing the urchin or smashing the urchin to really understand, is there a strategy that we can employ to actually bring back the kelp forest? So we've got a remarkable team at our Ocean Protection Council, and they're doing innovative stuff like that day in and day out.
Yeah, we're really trying to build on that with a platform looking at the science and technology, mapping kelp forests from the far northern border of California to the tip of Baja, to really better understand where the dynamics are and where we're losing our kelp forests, partnering with fishermen, as you're pointing out, to bring that together and have a net economic benefit. That uni that people are ordering hopefully will be California uni as a byproduct of this work. And so we're really, trying to kind of roll up sort of a full cycle of innovation and create a real paradigm of industry, science, agency integration for conservation of these extraordinary kelp forests that we have in California, and which you point out that we're losing as a result of this perfect storm of warm coastal waters and climate effects, as well as the urchin invasion at exactly the wrong time. And
Jay, I have a suggestion. Dr. Gold and the team have been doing this academic roadshow where they've been visiting different research institutions like UC Davis, Berkeley, Scripps, and identifying, hey, here is our work plan and here are our priorities, so that and here are potential opportunities for funding down the road, et cetera, to more align the incredible ocean research happening with our governmental work. But we should do the same with NGOs. I mean, we should suggest an NGO workshop where you bring the folks that are actually building those tools from TNC, from NRDC, from Ocean Conservancy, come together and say, hey, what are the different groups doing, and how can you draft off the investments we're making, and then how can we actually integrate the work that you're doing?
So yeah, we really value that. We really want to sit down with you, because I think we have definitely been trying to map out these synergies of what roles different institutions can play to really make this cycle of innovation happen much faster and really make an impact in real time in conserving kelp forests. So definitely take you up on that, because I think we think we're bringing the best minds and techniques together from California and across the West and globally even to address this issue. So we look forward to really rolling up our sleeves with you in this work, because this is really a critical flashing dashboard priority for the Conservancy in California. So we definitely value your input. And I have to say, you were absolutely passionate on this topic in a legislative hearing just before this COVID stuff kind of hit, and really it was fun to see your enthusiasm to embrace these new challenges that we're confronting in the state, and frankly bringing a lot of legislators along that had never heard this before. So it was really, I think it's just super important in an area where we really can show that working together we can make a difference. So excited about that. Liz, let me not get too carried away here.
Great. So we're moving on to some open space and park questions. So in the budget that was originally released in January, there was some funding for a potential new park. What's the status of, in the future, of Healthy California State Park System?
Yeah, I've been attached at the hip with one of your colleagues, Mike Connor, and Jay on this. There's a really pretty remarkable opportunity to bring together a coalition and make a generational investment in open space in Northern California that could become a park. And our goal is not to abandon that project, even during the fiscal straits we find ourselves in. So more to come on that. But I'm committed at our agency, and I know our state parks team is committed to actually being an active partner in trying to put that acquisition together. The governor is also passionate about trying to figure out how to get more parkland in urban areas. Some of our very large cities in California are very park poor, meaning there's just not a lot of local green space. So, we will continue to try to figure out how to expand access to that urban nature as well.
Great.
Yeah.
So building off that question, do you think that the shifts to remote working will free up developed land to turn back into parks and other open space? What can we do to be utilizing those open spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to, we are getting our head around just the transformational impact that COVID's going to have on the way we live our lives and do our work, not only for coming months, but probably coming years. And I think I know our administration and the governor are really open-minded to really thinking big. The governor established this economic recovery task force with key leaders from throughout the state. And one of the subcommittees is essentially, innovation and change, which is how do we do our work differently? We also have to face the fact that more and more of our commerce is actually happening online. So what does that mean to, brick and mortar, Main Street and retail? And are there opportunities for, more sort of ecological restoration or public access? So I think we're very open-minded to ideas like that as we move forward. And I just say, if TNC has big ideas, suggestions around how to leverage the changes we have to make for benefits, we are very open to that.
Yeah, I think we'd like to jump in with you in that and think about how we integrate regional planning in a much smarter way. And again, I think the Bay Area Greenprint model that we've been invested in together with the Department of Transportation and Caltrans, we're moving that down to the Southern California region with the Southern California Association of Governments into San Diego. And I think that also creates critical opportunities for connectivity, prioritizing conservation in certain spaces that just makes sense to conserve wildlife. And we've talked a bit about this, and I just wonder, are you in this kind of climate, can we advance connectivity initiatives to enhance wildlife mobility, especially thinking about the challenges confronting one of the great symbols of California, the mountain lion, which is now subject to an endangered species listing.
Yeah, I mean, this is another area I'm really passionate about, and I think we can do so much more than we're doing right now, and really building connectivity that in turn builds resilience of our natural communities to climate change, right? We know that there are all of these stressors on our plants and animals, including climate change, but also development. So how can we be much more integrated and comprehensive about a wildlife corridor strategy? You brought up mountain lions. Los Angeles, and I think is second only to Mumbai in the size of a city where tens of millions of people live next to an apex predator. In Mumbai, it's the Bengal tiger, I think, and in LA, it's the mountain lion. And there's just tremendous energy in broader LA about maintaining this incredible creature. So much so that we are, public-private investment will together build a bridge over 101 to connect two critical areas of habitat for the mountain lion. But likewise, we could be doing so much more. Example, we renewed our gas tax a couple of years ago that is generating important investments in modernizing, roads, transportation, transit. And there's a lot of money there for environmental mitigation. But if planned sort of in a patchwork way, it's going to be highly localized and not comprehensive. But boy, what if we brought all of the resources together in the state that we have for environmental mitigation and really thought strategically about where to invest most optimally in these wildlife corridors, what lands we need to focus on preserving. I know I'm speaking your language, Jay, and TNC, because that's the work that you do, but just know you have a really active partner in me on it. And we need you guys to think creatively. Part of the challenge of these jobs that I'm now in is you have very little time to sit back and reflect and think creatively. You're going. So I'm excited to use the authority of the role that I'm in to advance this strategy and so many more. And the NGOs leaders really serve as kind of the intellectual architects to provide us the ideas that we can then steal and give ourselves credit for.
Well, we want to give you some good material there. Just before the COVID breakout, we were having a series of really encouraging discussions with Caltrans and thinking about large-scale connectivity planning across critical systems to link habitat for mountain lions and bighorn sheep. And so we value that continued partnership in that space, because we just, I think we're just getting the focus that we need to make some progress in this space.
That's great. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, great. So another open space and park question. When will the coastal parks be opened? What are the criteria for opening the state parks?
Great question. I've been living that in real time. So regarding state parks and beaches, we've taken a regionalized approach. So some counties have done, for example, full closure of their state beaches. I'm sorry, their local beaches. And we've essentially aligned ourselves and closed our state beaches in those counties. For example, Los Angeles, Mendocino, Sonoma have closed. Others have modified access. So actually in all of our state parks, whether it's a beach or a park, we have closed to vehicle access. Those parks remain open for trail use, for biking and walking to the park. But when we close off vehicle access, what we think we're doing is really discouraging people to travel there, both to reduce the amount of visitation and avoid unsafe conditions, but then also really discouraging people going on that road trip to their favorite state park. Again, localizing stay-at-home order. The governor in coming days, maybe even today, will talk about what it looks like to expand, sort of restore vehicle access in those parks, which really means they can be fully utilized. And that's going to be done on a county by county basis. So it might look different, for example, at Anza Borrego than it would at Point Lobos, just given the size of the park and the density of population around the park. We have entered into what the governor calls stage 2 of our roadmap to resilience or return to normalcy. And that is where we are slowly restoring access to some economic activities and open space, but in very safe ways. So what I think you'll see in the coming weeks, depending on where you live, is restoring vehicle access to these parks, but maybe in different ways, reducing the capacity of our parking lots to discourage overcrowding. Certainly a lot more signage. Probably a strong encouragement or requirement to actually wear facial coverings if you're on a trail where you can't stay physically distant, those type of things. The governor and actually his wife, the first partner, are really passionate about trying to restore access just as quickly as is safe. So we're working to do that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And again, I think whatever we can do to get information out, both regionally and across the state through our channels, we want to help in doing that. Liz?
All right, our next question. How can conservation help address the state's housing crisis? With good land use planning and nature-forward approaches, do you think it's possible and necessary to invest in affordable housing and protect and enhance nature in and around cities?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think it sounds like you guys are already involved in the sort of green print movement and trying to understand how we build more housing in California, particularly more affordable housing, but in ways that are actually beneficial to our communities and the people that live there and to our environment. And that obviously means finding ways to actually build housing in our cities and our towns where there's active transportation, walking and biking available, where there's accessibility to transportation. We know that if we don't grow in a smart, climate-driven way, we will have continued challenges where people are just driving longer and longer every day of their life. That's obviously a huge environmental problem, the so-called vehicle miles traveled that have increased over time, but it's a huge lifestyle and standard of living challenge too, where, if you live in Tracy, California, and you have to drive into San Francisco every day, that takes 4.5 hours of your day out of your life that you could be spending with your family or exercising or, essentially living your life. So to me, it shouldn't be, and it should be, part of it is the environmental argument for really allowing our housing to grow within our cities and restoring and maintaining our open spaces for nature and for people to enjoy. But it's also, we also have to put it in the context of, look, this is housing where people want to live, but we have to figure out how to make it affordable. And so part of that involves, creating incentives that allow housing to be developed more affordably at lower cost, where housing is being done right, where you're placing it right. So I'm a big fan of figuring out how to create those incentives to densify communities and create a really strong comparative advantage for that type of housing versus the greenfield development that's just reducing the amount of open space in our state.
Yeah, we look forward to continuing to advance these green prints that I think do provide the way forward in that. And obviously we have to be sensitive to the homelessness challenge and affordability challenges, making sure that people have accessible housing, as that question has noted. Hey, I do think one thing we haven't really talked about yet that is really out there, and even as we're sheltering in place, is the differences between the Newsom administration and the Trump administration on water. And can you talk a bit about where we are going into a drought year now, and your thinking on that, and sort of how we get through this drought, really?
Yeah, I mean, at the highest level, California it's going to be a perennial issue. We live in a Mediterranean climate. Most of our population on the coast, and this is Southern California, but also Northern California, doesn't live near sources of water. So we've highly engineered, our rivers and our water systems. That's had real impacts on our environment, particularly over the last few decades, as the science has become more sophisticated and the use of water has grown. So we obviously have species on the brink of extinction, both salmon species that have been returning to our rivers for 10,000 years, as well as species that live their life in these rivers. And that's a problem. We have a state Endangered Species Act that requires us to be very, very careful about anything that would drive any plant or animal to extinction. At the same time, we are working very hard at trying to get out of this conflict that defines California's water policy historically. Fish versus farms, north versus south, urban versus rural. And what it's created is this sort of cycle of conflict and litigation that is not very forward-looking. So Jay has been involved in this discussion around, can we actually find a path forward for the next 15 years that really allows more water to stay in the rivers, particularly the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. Those river systems are the big, mighty rivers that supply most of our surface water and our critical habitat. So can we find peace there where we're doing enough for the environment, but also creating some level of certainty for water users? Our friends in the Central Valley on a per capita basis live in a region that's poorer than the state of Mississippi. And you have real challenges around how do you help build some certainty of water supplies that allow those agricultural driven economies to survive. So we're trying to find that balance. Where we find ourselves with the Trump administration though right now is that we had to draw the line on changes that the Trump administration proposed that we think drive these species toward extinction. And we always said that we want to find this broad peace on water management. But when it came to endangered species, we have a California Endangered Species Act. We have a set of values in California, and we cannot cross the line on doing anything that jeopardizes the survival of those species. So if you follow this issue, we are now in court with the federal government, literally today on a preliminary injunction motion. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how we defend those core environmental values that make us Californians, but at the same time, find common ground with our big cities, our agricultural partners, and really develop a framework, a pathway that can work so that we're all moving forward together and we're not devolving to just conflict and lawsuits.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for the energy that you and Secretary Blumenfeld have invested in this, and we're going to continue to work in the individual watersheds, and we're more optimistic. To your point, in being in a litigation cycle with the Trump administration, not a good sign to get to a long-term agreement. We're hopeful that we can just keep making progress in some of these watersheds along the way and show the way forward. And if there is a new administration, we get a bigger agreement and with more of these watersheds encompassed. And hey, I know I see we're out of time, running up on time. I want to give you the last word here. I want to thank you for spending this time with Nature Conservancy supporters, our board, our volunteer leadership, and the conservation teams that we pull up our sleeves and do work with you. And I just want to thank you for your enthusiasm each day. And I note that the first text I got from you this morning came at 5:16 a.m. So every day I do appreciate the energy that you bring to this job. It is communicable. It's infusing our organization with enthusiasm to make progress across the space. And we really enjoy this partnership with you. And so with that, let me give you the last word.
I would say, look, we're a movement of equals. And everyone plays their role. And I had a benefit of spending some of my career in a nonprofit, both at Environmental Defense Fund and then later at a startup philanthropy, the Water Foundation. And I got to say, we would not be able to get done what we are able to get done without you guys. It's readily apparent on things like the bonds that have been so critical to all the work that our agency does. But day in, day out, it's evident in the policy discussions that your team is having with our team on forest health, on this corridor strategy, on land use, on oceans. So just know that, thank you for the work that you guys do. And you really have an active partner in the Newsom administration. And then lastly, just keep it up. Like I said, we really need the creativity, the intellectual capital that you all provide. We are really eager to find these common ground solutions that I think TNC really epitomizes. How can we actually get work done? I want my time in this role to finish and me to be able to look back on tangible progress that we made. So I'm really excited for the partnership because you all at TNC are all about tangible progress. Whether it's land preserved or restored or protections that are enshrined in the law. So I'm just eager for the work ahead.
Great. We appreciate it. We just value deeply our partnership with you and just to keep this going. And again, thanks for your energy. Our thoughts, prayers are with you and your team and your family. And let's keep making progress together out there. And I just want to thank everybody that has joined us today. I know we probably barely scratched the surface of questions that we had hoped to get through in this dialogue. Hopefully we can do it again, because I think this is valuable for us to hear from you, Mr. Secretary. And I'm so enthused about the agenda that we have been talking about today. I think we've got a lot of common ground to make progress on as we look ahead here. And we thank you all for joining us for this series in the determining decade and thinking about, as Secretary Crowfoot said, how do we make progress every day to help make this world more sustainable and address the climate changes that are already upon us in this world, and make California a beacon of hope, make us the leader, continue to be the leadership state on climate change and environmental challenges. And so at the Nature Conservancy, we value this partnership so much with the Resources Agency. We thank you. We look forward to working through this time with you, and hopefully we do get the opportunity to bring voters a big picture climate, wildlife resilience, water resilience, safe, clean drinking water, fire resilience strategy, and a viable way to keep these things funded even amid challenging times. So Secretary Crowfoot, thank you, and we look forward to continuing to join you in this challenge. And everyone out there, thank you for taking an hour of your busy time and these really challenging times to join us for this discussion. And we look forward to having further discussions with you in the weeks ahead on this.
And lastly, happy Mother's Day for the moms out there.
There you go.
Oh, your moms.
Thank you for that. Yes. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day weekend.
All right, take care.